All right, so Bitcoin. Everyone's talking about it, especially with October right around the corner, those historical October surges. But is it really all it's cracked up to be?
It's definitely had a reputation for a reason. 8 of the last 10 Octobers. Bitcoin's jumped up an average of 20%.
Wow, 20% on average. That's huge. There's got to be a catch. What's driving those kinds of spikes?
Right. Well, it's not magic or anything, but it's like a bunch of different things kind of come together in October. Like back in October 2013, Baidu, they started accepting Bitcoin and boom, 58% surge.
Wow, just like that.
Yeah. And then there was that Chinese economic thing in 2015. Bitcoin shot up 46%. And of course, who could forget 2017? The CFTC gives the green light to Bitcoin futures, another 46% jump.
It's like clockwork almost. Big events happen, Bitcoin prices go through the roof, at least in October, it seems. But this year feels different, doesn't it? Even more eventful than usual. What's unique about October 2024?
Oh yeah, this year's got its own flavor for sure. We've got the whole FTX creditor payout situation looming, inflation data could be about to take a nosedive, and there's even chatter about BlackRock's Bitcoin ETF, maybe getting approval for options trading.
Options trading on a Bitcoin ETF. Wow, that just took things to a whole new level. Even for seasoned investors, that's got to seem pretty complex. Can you break that down for us a bit?
Sure.
Yeah.
Think of options trading like this. It's a way to magnify your bets, the good and the bad. It's all about leverage. Imagine instead of buying, say, a house outright, you buy the option to buy it later. That's options trading in a nutshell. You control more with a smaller upfront investment. And it's getting seriously popular, even more so than investing in those Bitcoin mining companies.
So options trading, that's like pouring gasoline on a fire. It could amplify those gains even more. But let's back up for a second to those FTX payouts. What's the latest on that front?
Well, the final approval for their wind-down plan, that's expected any day now, maybe even today, October 7th. Once that happens, we should get some news on the payout schedule pretty quickly. Definitely a big deal for anyone who got caught up in that FTX collapse.
Absolutely. A lot of people have been watching that situation very closely. And speaking of big events, the U.S. Consumer Price Index report, that drops this week. What are the predictions looking like?
Projections are showing that the year-over-year inflation rate might drop to 2.3%. If that happens, it could inject some serious optimism into the markets.
So good news potentially on the inflation front, but of course we've got another major event looming that could really shake things up, the U.S. election. I got to ask, what does a potential Trump win mean for Bitcoin?
Ooh, buckle up. This is where things get interesting.
Interesting. So where do we even begin? How do we make sense of all this, especially for our own portfolios with all this uncertainty?
Yeah, no, it's a lot to take in. But it's not as overwhelming as it might seem. It's all about, focusing on what we can control, making smart decisions based on, what we know. And remember, just because Bitcoin has done well in October in the past doesn't mean it's a guaranteed win this time,
Right. No guarantees in crypto. So what are some things we should be paying attention to? Where do we start?
Well, keep an eye on bond yields. If those start climbing, it could mean a bumpier ride for Bitcoin.
Interesting. Bond yields. Okay. So rising bond yields could equal some Bitcoin volatility.
Exactly. And remember all that talk about crypto summer? Feels a bit more like spring right now, with a chance of thunderstorms. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. So maybe cautiously optimistic for now.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. Watch those FTX payouts closely and that CPI data that's coming out. Those are going to be early indicators of how things might play out.
FTX payouts, CPI data, bond yields. Got it. Okay, but what about, the elephant in the room, the U.S. election? You mentioned earlier a Trump win could actually push the Fed to keep interest rates higher, which seems counterintuitive, right? I thought Trump was good for Bitcoin.
Yeah, that's a common perception. I mean, you've got Trump with that anti-establishment image, and he's seen as pro-Bitcoin by many. But markets, especially when you throw politics into the mix, well, they have a funny way of surprising us.
They definitely have a mind of their own.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And to understand why a Trump win might not be an instant Bitcoin party, we got to look at the bigger picture. So on a personal level, yeah, Trump might be pro-Bitcoin, but it's his economic policies, especially his stance on spending, that could create inflationary pressure. That's where the Fed comes in, right? They might need to raise those interest rates to, kind of balance things out.
So it's like this balancing act between political ideology and economic reality. And Bitcoin is stuck right in the middle.
Exactly. And here's where it gets really interesting. We're not just talking about Bitcoin's price moving in isolation. It's global events, political decisions, even just social sentiment. Everything is impacting the crypto market these days.
Wow, it's way more intricate than it used to be. It's not just about Bitcoin going up anymore.
Exactly. And that's what makes it exciting. There's so much potential, a bit of unpredictability. It's a great time to be following the markets.
I can see that. But for those of us who aren't, expert traders or anything, what's the most important thing to remember as we navigate the rest of October?
Don't let FOMO, the fear of missing out, guide your decisions.
Easier said than done. FOMO is like the unofficial language of crypto.
I know. It's easy to get caught up in the hype, especially in a month like October. Bitcoin's volatility is legendary. We've seen crazy rallies and sudden dips.
Yep.
Don't let the excitement of potential gains cloud your judgment.
So it's about, what, staying level-headed even when everyone else is freaking out?
Exactly. Stick to your plan, manage your risk, and don't be afraid to take profits when you're happy with your gains.
Words to live by. Speaking of strategy, we've talked a lot about risks. But what about some positive signs? What should people be looking out for in the coming weeks?
Right. So even with all the uncertainty, there are definitely some reasons to be optimistic. Remember those technical indicators we talked about earlier? Well, even with the recent Bitcoin pullback, those daily reversal indicators, they're actually suggesting a potential upswing. Just like they're saying, hey, things might be turning around soon.
So even though the markets are a bit jumpy, the underlying signals are looking up.
Yeah, it's like, reading between the lines. On the surface, everything seems calm, but under the surface, lots of potential energy building.
Okay, I like that. But we also talked about how important those FTX payouts and the upcoming CPI data are. How do those factor into this potential upswing?
Well, those events could be the catalysts. If the FTX payouts are seen as positive and the CPI data shows that inflation is still cooling down, that could really get things moving.
Right.
It's like striking a match near some dry tinder. It could ignite a market rally.
Okay, so these next few weeks are make or break for Bitcoin in October.
They could be, yeah. And for those who are feeling adventurous and understand the risks involved, exploring options trading strategies could be a way to, really take advantage of the volatility.
Options trading, that's a whole other conversation. But before we go down that rabbit hole, let's circle back to something you mentioned earlier. The decline of Bitcoin mining as a viable investment. What's driving that?
Basically mining Bitcoin, which, remember, is all about solving those complex math problems to, add new blocks to the blockchain and earn Bitcoin rewards.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's getting way more competitive.
So it's like the gold rush. The early birds got all the good stuff, and now it's way harder to strike it rich.
Exactly. There are two big things at play here. First, the mining hash rate, which is a fancy way of saying the total computer power being used to mine Bitcoin is going through the roof. More miners equal more competition for those Bitcoin rewards. And second, the mining difficulty, how hard it is to actually solve those math problems, it's near an all-time high. So it's getting tougher and less profitable for individual miners.
So unless you've got like a warehouse full of supercomputers, it's not really worth it to mine Bitcoin anymore.
Sadly, for most individual investors, that's the reality. We've seen miner revenue plummet, and that's reflected in the performance of Bitcoin mining stocks. They're lagging behind Bitcoin itself, which is why investors are, looking for other options.
Which brings us back to those alternative options, like MicroStrategy, options trading. Investors are evolving, moving away from the old ways of doing things, and trying to find new ways to profit from Bitcoin.
Exactly. And that evolution is happening fast. It just goes to show you how dynamic and innovative the crypto space is.
And it highlights just how important it is to stay informed. Things change fast. But with all this talk of volatility, risk, and new strategies, it's easy to overthink things. So if you could give our listeners one piece of advice to help them navigate the next few weeks, what would it be?
It's funny how we started talking about Bitcoin going up and down, and now we're talking about like strategy and mindset and the whole crypto landscape changing.
It's all connected. The early days of crypto, it was like the Wild West out there. Everyone chasing those big gains, not a lot of strategy, But as the market matures, so do the conversations around it.
It's not just about what anymore, it's why and how and what now.
Exactly. And that's a really good sign, actually. It means people are thinking more deeply about it, less about getting rich quick, more about the potential of, blockchain and all that. They're thinking long term.
So we're not just riding the waves anymore, we're learning to navigate.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, are you a passenger on the ship or are you the captain? You're not just along for the ride. You're charting a course, looking at the weather, adjusting your sails.
I like that. So as we wrap up our deep dive here, Bitcoin, elections, portfolios, the whole shebang, What's the one thing, the one big takeaway our listeners should remember?
Knowledge is power, especially in crypto. Stay informed, stay curious, and never stop learning. This space changes so fast, the only way to stay ahead is to keep learning.
Couldn't agree more. And there you have it, folks. Another deep dive into the wild world of Bitcoin. Uncertainty, risk, making smart decisions, it's all part of the game. And hey, with a little bit of luck, maybe we'll all be thinking back to October 2024 from a beach somewhere, sipping on something a little stronger than a pumpkin spice latte.
Now that's a goal if I ever heard one.
Until next time, happy trading, everybody.